How to export and update SQL Server table data using Excel, step by step. In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can export, update and insert data into SQL Server tables using Excel. But you need to bear with me and be patient with me, and you will need to be patient with yourself because there's a lot of information that I need to show you. To be able to create a tool in Excel that you can use, especially in a user-friendly fashion, to update and insert data into SQL Server tables, or SQL tables for that matter, and to add the ability to validate data, does require a little bit of programming, and it is a more of an advanced level of Excel. So if it is intimidating to you, I don't want you to be discouraged. I'm going to show you the process in its simplest form. We're going to focus in part one this video how to export the data. So we'll create a button and I will show you how you can then export the data from a SQL Server table. And then in the next video, we will focus on importing that data back into SQL Server. And then we'll continue to add upon that and make it more sophisticated, more user-friendly and robust as we continue through the different parts of this video series. Ultimately, you should be able to create a very impressive solution for your own company or for your own needs. You will have to have access to a SQL Server database. Now, if you don't have one, don't worry. I'm going to share a link in the description below where you can go and you can download the SQL Server Express Edition, which is fully functional for all purposes. And that will give you a great opportunity to get familiar with SQL Server. I believe it comes with the additional tools like SQL Server reporting services and that sort of thing, like SSIS as well. And so if you like what you see, getting familiar with SQL, getting familiar with Excel, and you want to continue down this path, mastering data visualization, data intelligence, that sort of thing, this would be a great opportunity for you to get to know all the tools that come with SQL Server. It's a really great solution to use. So when we dive into the programming side of things, Visual Basic Applications, I'm just going to show you the concepts that apply to what we are trying to accomplish in the tools that we're creating in these videos. I will try to put together some links to free resources and tutorials where you can find more information about SQL, about SQL Server, about VBA, and Excel as well. And as time permits, through the next few months, I'll try to do a few little crash courses myself that I'll share with you. But first, I just want to show you how to accomplish what I've been advocating on this channel, and that is the ability to use Excel as a great tool to bulk edit data in SQL tables, starting with SQL Server, and then as time permits, I'll look at MySQL and Postgres and such as well. One other prerequisite I forgot to mention is the AdventureWorks2014 sample database that's available as a free download. I'll also share a link to that database, which you will need to install or restore in SQL Server once you've installed SQL Server Express, or if you have an existing instance of SQL Server, that's great. So the first thing we want to do is obviously open up Excel. So let's just go ahead and do that. I do use the latest version of Excel, 2016. I'm going to open up a blank workbook here. But whatever version of Excel you have, if it's an earlier version, it should be just fine for the purpose of what we're trying to do. The first thing we want to do once we have our workbook open is we want to save it as an We want to save it as a macro-enabled workbook, so that's the .xlsm file ending. If you have older version of Excel, like 97 around, then it's, I believe, just a .xls file ending for, whether it's macro enabled or not. So let's just go ahead and save that. Save as, temp, and change the file ending xlsm. So remember, by default, it wants to try to save it as a .xls, and we want the .xlsm. And let's just call it, book one. Oh, let's call it part one. Export data from SQL table to Excel, and save. All right. The second thing that you may need to do the first time that you do development work in Excel is you need to get the developer tab on the ribbon. So if you don't see the developer tab yet, what you need to do is go to File and Options, and in your Customize ribbon, just go down and you'll see the developer tab. So it's likely unchecked if you didn't see it, so just check it. The defaults under it should be all fine, and we say OK. So now we have the developer tab. Once we have the developer tab, what we want to do first is we want to create a button that we're going to use for the export part of this, as you saw in the preview of this video. So to do that, we go to Insert, and down under Active X Controls, you select the Command button. And once you have that selected, you can sort of drag it and draw it like that. And that's the default name, Command Button 1. As a programmer, I do recommend, and also as an advanced Excel developer or user, I do recommend that you use consistent naming conventions and don't just go with all the default names that Excel or other tools may assign. So in the case of Command Button, if you right click on the button and you select Properties, at the top you see the name. That's the name of the button in the back end. That's not what the user is going to see. That's what you will see as the VBA programmer. And my naming convention for buttons is CMD for command, and then just the purpose of the button, and it's going to be an export. And then once you have that, go to caption and change that to export, and that gives you the user-friendly label on the button that says export, and then you can close that out. So there we have our button. Once we have the button, we need to start to add the code behind the button that actually tells the button what to do. So before we do that though, you'll see we have a design mode icon here on the ribbon. If you are in design mode, that means you can set controls up and go into properties and test it out. If you want to test your code and test the buttons, take the design mode off by clicking on it again. You'll see it's different now. It's just a regular cursor. When we click on it, the button gets suppressed, but nothing happens because we actually don't have any logic behind the button yet. So now let's go back into the design mode, and you can simply double click on the button to get into the code behind it. So let's do that for now. Once you do that, it creates this sub wrapper, which you have two things that do events or processing in VBA in Excel. The one is subs, which is like a procedure or routine that does some steps and processing. and it can take variables and manipulate the variables and pass them on to other subs. Function would be different, where a function would actually return a value. So the function itself would return a value associated with the name of the function. Other than that, the two are very similar. So the easiest way to just give you that hello world experience is to just write a value into the first cell. Let's make it the second row, first column. So just type in cells, and as you can see, once you put your parentheses there, row index, we give it row index 2 and column index 1 dot value equals double quotes hello world. So at this point, when you go back to the front part of Excel, so easiest way to do that is just go to your Excel icon top left and take the design mode off, click on it, and there you go, hello world in your cell right there. So congratulations if this is your first programming experience in Excel or any other programming language. So that being said, do keep in mind that doing this, following me, if you're totally new to SQL and or VBA, then this is a really good experience for you to follow me along and try to do what I do here in these videos, because that's going to expose you to some of the concepts of SQL, and it's going to expose you to programming in Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA, which actually a lot of those programming concepts are applicable to other programming languages as well. So you can get your feet dirty with Excel and get familiar with VBA and learn through VBA, and it's an easy, accessible environment to work in. And then the concepts that you learn, much of that is very similar in Java and C++ and C# and so on. The syntax may be a little different, like spoken languages are different. We all speak, different languages, but many of the concepts of those languages are pretty much the same or very similar. And that's the same with programming languages as well. So it's really time well spent. Be patient with yourself. If you're new to this, bear with me. Just try it a few times. Let me know if you have any questions, and you'll get to the top, and you'll be really good at it. And imagine being able to do programming in Excel, and be one of only a few people around that can actually do that kind of work in Excel and accomplish what we're accomplishing here. So now let's go back into the code. So you can just double click back on the cell, and let's take this out and now start to add some logic. So one thing I quickly do want to mention is one of the concepts in programming and VBA is that you need to use variables. Variables will contain values, and those values will be used in the programming procedure. There are two ways that you can define variables. The one is like a loosely defined way, which I'll demonstrate now. Let's say we have a variable I. Let's just get some focus here. So I equals 10. If we do that, that's perfectly fine in VBA. It's going to try to determine what the type of I is by looking at the value that you assign to it. And it's going to see it's a whole number or an integer, and it's going to consider this a type integer. But it's a programming nightmare or a maintenance nightmare if you have a lot of code and you have variables like this and you don't really know what the type is easily. And so it's better to follow the strongly typed approach, which most structured programming languages will follow. And to do that, I do recommend in all your code to add this option explicit, and enter. If you do this, then this is no longer a legitimate expression. To make this legitimate, you need to add dim in front of it. Tells VBA you're declaring a variable explicitly. It's I in this case. And if you want to make it a type integer, it's going to be as integer. Now, to assign the value 10 on the next step or next line, you just do that. And that's how I recommend you do it. Another recommendation that I would give you is to declare all your variables. As you continue to program, declare all your variables in the top section altogether and do some of your initial assignments underneath that. It just makes it easier to maintain your code and quickly go to the top of your sub in this case and see what variables you have and what the initial values are. All right, so in order to save some time, I am going to copy and paste some pre-written code out of a sample that I've on my second monitor here. It just makes the process a little quicker. You don't have to watch me type all this stuff out. So the first thing that we're going to declare is a series of string and integer values like that. And let me also initialize them. Like so. Alright, so what we have here is in order to connect to the database, Excel needs to know where the database is located, which server it's on, what's the login credentials in order to connect to it. And by the way, the connection method or security method that we would use for this exercise is the SQL user option, not the integrated Windows option, but the SQL option. That way you have an explicit declaration of what the username and password is, and you control that from within SQL Server. So it's also important thing, by the way, if you set up SQL Server, to use the mixed mode of security. That way you can use both the Windows authentication approach for some things that you do, especially the quick and dirty things, and having the explicit SQL user login for other things. So that being said, here you can see I've declared my user, password, server name, database name, and also the connection string. The connection string is pretty much, it takes these different credentials, put it together in the predefined string format, which we call a connection string, which is something that database vendors would define how or specify what that needs to look like and what information needs to be in it. And that's what the DB connection or dbcon variable will do in this case. And then we have our SQL or SQL query. You'll hear me say SQL and sometimes SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. SQL is just the lazy way of saying it. So I would use those two terms intermittently. Then I define just some string and integer values. The string status is a variable that we are going to use when we populate the data into the Excel spreadsheet to show where we are, show the progress. In the bottom left section of Excel, in the footer, there's a little area where you can indicate the status, so you can control that. We're going to use that to show the progress that we're making, especially when you load a lot of data and it takes a few minutes to process all the data and output all the data or load all the data. It's nice to use that status bar to give some updates of where we are in the process. And then I just use a couple of variables, I and j, that we'll use to step through iterate through all the rows and the columns, which I'll explain in a little bit, as when we get there. And then lastly, a couple of things like the start row, which is my starting point. You can hardcode that as 8, or use a variable like this, and that way, if you want to change the 8 to a 4, a different position where you want to start the data output in your spreadsheet, you just have to change it in one place, because things like this may be used in several different places in your code. So it's good to use this kind of approach where you use variables in some of your calculations further down in the code. Makes it easier to make changes quickly, and also to debug and troubleshoot. And lastly, I assign the values, for my username, password, SQL Server, and database name. I'll just click back on this Excel icon to jump back, and we take the design mode off. We can actually delete that. If we click on export, still nothing really happens. We haven't done anything that's going to visually change what we see here. This would be a good point to save the work we've done so far. And at this point, I'm just quickly going to show you the SQL tables that we'll use in this exercise. So I have a second monitor open, and I'm just going to find my SQL Server Management Studio that I've opened, and here it is. And this is the query that I'm going to use for this exercise. This is the database name, AdventureWorks2014. I can expand the list of databases. You'll see it there. You can expand that, see the tables, a list of tables for the different data points in the sample data, and views, which I'll explain in just a little bit. And this is my server name, Viola /SQL 2014 in my case. It will be different in your case if you name it something else. Now, I like to use views, and it's good that the sample database, the AdventureWorks 2014 database, have some views to demonstrate the concept as well. I like to use views, especially when I have to embed my SQL statements within my programming code, like the VBA that we're going to do in this exercise, because it makes it simpler and makes it easier to maintain. The difference between a view and a table is the table actually contains the data, and you may have a few different tables involved. Maybe one table contains addresses, one contains contacts, and one contains, say, customers, and you need to join those tables together through some SQL query writing to present the data and pull the data that you need, and associate those tables with each other in the correct manner, which we call joins. So left join, right join, inner join, that sort of thing. And I'll try to get into more detail about those things in other videos. So I do want to keep it to the basics. So I realize, it may be a little intimidating if you're new to all of this to follow everything I'm saying, but please let me know in the comment section below, if you have any questions about any aspects that I'm talking about here, and I'll try to address those. And I'll put some, various links in the description that will take you to, resources where you can, maybe get some tutorials on, Excel basics, SQL basics, SQL Server basics, and so on. Anyways, to get a quick idea of what a query looks like, and what query is represented by this particular view that we're looking at here, you can find that view. It's the sales.v individual, sales.v individual. There we go. You can right click on it, and it's just a quick and easy way to see what's behind it. So script view as, create to, and new query editor window. And that's what the query looks like. So you can see it's a little more elaborate, and it can get pretty elaborate, as you do more advanced work in SQL. So you don't want to put all of this stuff in your programming code, especially if you want to tweak this, as you go down the road. So if you wrap this in a view, then you can update the view, and as long as the number of columns don't change, you can change the queries underneath, and without having to update or touch your VBA code again. So it's a good practice to follow. And just to show you here, you'll see that some of these columns, like the name, first name, middle name, last name, that stuff, that comes out of the person table, the P as a short alias that we can use. The PP, so phone number, that's the PP down here, so that's the phone number type. We see A for address, that's over here, and the address table, and so on. So we don't have to worry about that at this point. We're just going to use the view like this. Now, while we're at it, you can also do a select star from the sales.v individual view. So you can do a select star, and that's a quick way to include all the columns in a view or a table. And you can see the data that we get back. And down here at the bottom we see 18,508 rows. Now, I don't recommend that you use this approach when you include your query statement in your programming code like VBA and Excel, because if this view changes, if they add more columns to this view, then that may break your program. So having the explicit columns in your select statement like this would be the preferred way to do it. So one other thing that I am going to use for testing purposes is I'm going to add the top 10 statement to this select statement. That's going to limit the data so that it only returns the first 10 records. So if we run this query, it's going to look like that. So that makes it just quick and easy to do your testing once you're happy with your testing, and trial and error in your VBA in Excel. Then you can come back and you can take the top 10 off. But for now, let's just keep that. Alright, so I'm going to copy this, and let's go back to Excel. Okay, before I go back into the VBA code, I think some of you will have a question, and the question is, why do I want to use VBA and this approach to pull the data out of my SQL Server tables, rather than using the other option that's the one that we would typically use if we just quickly want to query data out of Excel. And I'm going to show you that option real quickly, because it is a handy way to do it, and then I'll come back and explain why I'm not using that approach for the demonstration and the training that we're doing in these videos. Alright, to pull the data in the quick and easy way, or using the quick and easy way, you come over here to data, and your version of Excel may be slightly different, but it should be very similar, and you should be able to follow similar steps in order to pull the data out. But in my version of Excel, I just go to data, get data from database, from SQL Server database, and once the wizard form comes up, the first thing you want to do is you need to tell it which SQL Server we're pulling the data from. So So that's my server name. In the next field, you need to specify the database name. So it's AdventureWorks2014. And at this point, we can expand the advanced options, and in the SQL statement, you can paste your code. And click OK. From here, we need to specify the destination point where we're going to load this. Load to. And at this point, I'm going to say load it to my existing worksheet, and that point, that location right there is ideal. And I'll click OK. And that's how easy it can be to pull the data one way, from SQL Server into Excel. This is just one way. You cannot post or change data and post it back into SQL Server from here. But this is a quick and easy way for you to pull data out of SQL Server tables. So, this being said, let's jump back to sheet 1 and go back into developer design mode. Go back to the code. All right. So, I am going to use the VBA approach. I'm going to show you the VBA approach because this allows us to pull the data one record at a time. And for each record, we also have the ability to step through each one of the fields or columns of data. And that gives us a lot of control because as we pull the data out of the system, we have the ability to change formatting in the way we want to display the data in Excel. We can highlight certain fields or certain columns based on certain data criteria. And, we can, like in our case, we're going to make the header labels bold. So that's why I recommend this approach. And when we come to the point where we need to insert and update data in the database, we are going to have to use similar, VBA code to do that. So I think it's easier to learn by doing the export one as an example. That way, when we get to insert and update, you are already familiar with some of the ideas that I'm showing in the VBA code here. All right, so the next section of code that I'm going to paste over in here is my connection string. And the connection string, like I said, that's just the the format of how the information that needs to be assembled in order to tell Excel how to connect to SQL Server and which database and so on. This is just the format that Microsoft would recommend for their specific data provider, which in this case is the SQL OLADB provider. In addition to that, I pasted out a couple of ADO related pieces here, and I'll come back to this in just a second. Then lastly, this is how I built my SQL statement or query in VBA. I have a variable SQL query, and I systematically add to it, as you can see here. And you don't have to do it as cleanly and as in as many rows or lines of code as I'm doing here. It's just easier on the eyes if you do it this way. It's clean, to see which fields you have and so on. Now ADO. This is an additional piece that we need to declare up above the ADO connections. But first, let me just comment these out. So I'll use this as an opportunity to show you commenting. So in VBA, you can comment out by using a single quote like that. And when you jump to the next line, that line becomes green above it. So once it turns green, it tells you that it's not going to consider, these lines of code in the VBA. These are just, for your information. So I do recommend, as good programming practice, to add comments in your code. That way you can explain to yourself and others who may come after you to understand or help them understand what the purpose of the different sections of code will be. So at this point, let's just save. Go over to the front end, go out of design mode, click on the export button, and we can see didn't do anything visually, but it also didn't error out. If you have any errors in your coding, then when you click on this button, something will happen, and it will break, and it will sort of end up somewhere in the VBA code after a message pops up. So that way something is not right in your code. So at this point, let's just go back into the VBA code. So one thing that we also need to do the first time that we set up an Excel macro-enabled workbook that we want to use to connect, pull, and import data into SQL Server is we need to make a reference to one of the Microsoft DLLs that may not be available. It may not be checked already. So let me just show you. It's the easiest way. So I go over here to Tools and References. And here you'll see that there's a series of Microsoft or other DLLs, Dynamic Link Libraries or TLB. It's kind of similar type libraries. It's collections of functions and procedures and functionality that's available, that's already been developed. Some of it comes with Microsoft, some of it comes, from the other applications that you install on your, Windows environment. And if you can, find it and look it up, in this list here, there's a possibility that you can use those DLLs or libraries in your VBA code. So the one that we want to add is the Microsoft ActiveX data objects. The one underneath here is listed as 2.5. I prefer to go with 2.8. So to find that one, let's just scroll down to Microsoft ActiveX. ActiveX 2.8. This one. You can see down here, this is the location of that particular file. So these should install, when you install. Alright, so that's the location of this library file. We just need to check that option to include it. And then at that point, I'm going to copy and paste over my ADO declarations, object or variable declarations. Put them there, and these ADO. So ADO is is what we get out of that library that we just included under Tools and References, and it's a data connectivity, library of functions and features that we will use or tap into and utilize in our VBA code to establish the connection and pull and push data back and forth into SQL Server. So it includes the ADODB connection object, a record set, which will contain the data. So the connection establishes literally the connection to the SQL Server, or pipe, you can also think of it that way. And the record set contains the data, and the command sort of executes. It contains the SQL statement that needs to be executed. So now we have that, and we can uncomment these two. There may be an option on your toolbar like these. If you do this one, it uncomments everything that you've selected. And at this point, I'll save my work. If we go to Excel, we click Export, you can see no errors. So we are good so far. So at this point, what I've done is I just completed my ADO related lines of code. I assigned the SQL statement, so the SQL query variable contents to the command text of the command ADO object. On that same object, I set the active connection to the ADO connection object, which was opened. And I also opened the record set like this, rs ADO open. So when it comes to the ADO objects, and sometimes with other objects that come out of the DLLs or type libraries that you pull in through the tools and references that we talked about, close them and set them to nothing once you're done. And then at the end, you also want to set your some of your application attributes back to the defaults. So on the status bar here at the end, I set it to like a total value. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So for now, I'm going to comment that out. The cursor, we set that back to the default, so we want to make sure once we're done with our processing that the cursor doesn't remain an hourglass, but goes back to just the regular cursor. And then we want to set screen updating back to true, which means that it's going to refresh the screen. And I'm going to explain this in a little bit, why we want to manipulate whether the screen updates or not. So at this point, I think it's time to pull in some data. We're going to start by showing some columns, so the column labels. We want to pull that out first, put that in the first row in our spreadsheet, so that represents the labels of the columns, and the data will populate under that. Alright, so this little bit of code will do a couple of things. We'll set the status bar to saying formatting columns, and because this is the only thing we'll do, even though it takes quick, it should stop at that because we have this commented out as well. So the status bar should show formatting columns, once the process is done as well. And I'll use that as an opportunity to show you what that looks like in the status bar. And then we're using a for loop to just go through the column labels. So it's a for j0 to count of fields -1 because the ADO column numbering starts at 0. So from 0 to count -1, and then we use the offset, which we set to 1, offset up here, to add that to the j, which starts at 0. So j plus offset of 1 gives you 1. So in column 1, or cell column 1 in the spreadsheet, we're going to start to populate the column names. And so we then one by one go through those cells in that row I, which we set to start at 8, so start row is 8 and I equals start row, so that's where we're going to start to populate data. And we're going to set that to the fields. Then we're also going to just show a little bit of how formatting will work in VBA. In this case, we're going to set the font.bold property of those cells representing the labels to bold. So bold equals true. So let's run this and see how this works. So go back out of design mode, export, and there we go. So here we have our labels. You can see at the bottom here it says formatting columns. And if we highlight just a quick and dirty, thing about Excel is if you highlight the entire spreadsheet, you can do that by clicking the top left corner. Once you do that, just double click on one of the column lines there, the lines between the divider line between two columns. And when you do that, that will automatically adjust the column width to the longest value that's present in each of those columns. So it's just a quick and easy way to quickly, just expand the columns to see everything and not, clip off, some of the information. So now that we have our columns, let's go back into the code. So back in design mode, double click. So back in the code here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to start to iterate through the ADO record set, starting at row 1 and work our way through to the end. So let me copy and paste my next block of code. Alright, so here we have our next block of code. We use a while loop this time. While ADO is not at the end of file, so EOF I believe stands for end of file. While it's not at the end, starting at the first row by default, we're going to step through them row by row. And then for each row, so I representing row, starting at I, which is 8 plus 1, so row 9 in the Excel spreadsheet is going to be our first row of data that we pull out of the record set. And then for that, we do our for j loop again, starting at 0 to count -1 of the ADO fields to get each one of the fields in that row of data. So for each one of those fields, we want then to assign that field value to the corresponding cell value. So that's the for j loop. Once we're done with our for j loop, we step up, move next, ADO.move next to the next line or data row from the record set. So let's see how that works. Out of design mode, export, and here you can see we get some funkiness going on. The screen sort of blanks out a little bit. It says not responding, and so on. And there's a few things that we can do, and I'll explain that in a little bit how that works. So what happens here is, so we pulled out all the data. I forgot to put the top 10 in my select statement, so let me just quickly do that. Top 10. Alright, so let's give that another try. There you go. So what happens here is, as it tries to go through all the data row by row, cell by cell, the screen updating is actually still true or active. So it may try to update the screen, and because there's too much activity going on between Excel and the backend programming running, you want to make it a little easier for Excel and to your users to give them a clean experience. So if we take the top 10 off, and it's going to run through all 18,508 records. If we click export, you'll see that the screen is going to go blank. It may say not responding. So at this point you may be wondering what on earth is going on. Is this working, or what's happening? So here's what we want to do, and here is what's happening. We have the screen updating still active. So that's one thing that we want to do, is we want to stop the screen from updating. So let me just put the top 10 back for a minute. Top 10, okay. I'm going to copy and paste another little bit of code. So after our first for j loop, where we pull out the column labels, I am going to put in this little bit of code. And this just helps Excel along. So the do events is just a built-in procedure that comes with VBA and Excel that allows Windows to complete all its messaging and internal processes. So you can run a do events to give it a bit of a break, a breather, and you can also sometimes need to add this little trick where you also need to let the application just wait a second, which is what I'm doing here. Let's just give it a second to wait. That gives it time to repaint or refresh the Excel front-end screen, and then we set the screen updating to false. So what that should give us is so every time we click export, we want to clear out all the existing values that we output before. We want to clear that out, and then we want to rewrite the column labels and just show that while the process is running through the data and fetching all the rows of data. So let's see how that works. So it clears it out. You just saw the labels there for a minute, a second or two, and then it painted or printed the 10 records of data. So going back to the code, if we take the top 10 out of the query and we run it now, you'll see that it does the part where it shows the clearing, but it may, depending on how fast your computer is, it may give you what we're seeing right now, kind of a blank screen, the hourglass, and you're not quite sure what's going on. At least it's still finished rather quickly, but if you have like a few 100,000 records that you need to pull out, it might take a minute or two and make the user sit there and wonder, is the program hanging or is it actually fetching data? So let's make this even more clean and elegant from the user's perspective. So another few bits of code that I want to add here. Let me just copy and paste that over. Alright, so I just added this little bit of code here. This actually. So what this does is it gives us the ability to show some progress. So we're going to freeze the screen so that we don't show any, Excel will not try to refresh the Excel front-end screen because we set that to false. So we set the status bar here to the string status value, that's this, loading data and record count, and then we just show during the first 100 records or so, we just show them one by one. It ticks off very quickly. Then once we get to hundreds, this I step is set to increments of 100. I set that up here at the top, over here. So we want to use that. Then every 100 records or so, we refresh the status bar, so we update that to the latest record count, so we're going to increment by 100. And we're going to give it a moment to do the event, so let Windows catch up with everything that's happening, and then just continue through the loop until we step through all the records. So this does slow the process down a little bit, but it gives Windows and Excel an opportunity to catch up and therefore prevent the blank screen experience, while we still show progress by using the status bar at the bottom. So let's see how that works. And I'll save my work at this point. And let's say export. So it clears it out. We see at the bottom here how it's stepping through. It's a little slower, but not too bad. It's the idea of using this approach is not about performance as much as a practical solution that gives you the ability to review data in bulk and be able to edit it in bulk. So at this point, I'm going to highlight everything. Just double click on a column side there just to expand it based on all the data that we have now. You can see at the bottom, okay, we still need to, at the end of the routine, we want to update the record count to the final total count. So let's do that quickly. Go back in here and let me just uncomment that line. That will show us the final total record count. Go back, export, clears it out, repopulates, steps through it, and let's just let it continue until it finishes. And there we go. So it stops at 18,508 records, and you can cross-check that easily. One of the nice little features about Excel is when you highlight an entire column, it's going to count all the values, all the cells that have values. And we should have values for all the data records plus the column. So it should be the 18,508 plus 1, so it should be 18,509. And so if you highlight this and you go over to the right hand side here at the bottom, it's a built-in feature of Excel. It shows you the count. It's 18,509. So that lines up, and we're in pretty good shape. So that is pretty much the quick and dirty of how you export, how you connect to a SQL Server database using VBA, and how you can then click on a button to export data out of one or more SQL tables through a query or a view, like we used the view, and put that data into a spreadsheet. And again, we use this approach so that we can also do row level and cell level, field level formatting, and we'll address that in a later video when we start to make the solution really nice. So for now, we focus on exporting the data, and then in the next video, I'm going to show you the quick and dirty of how to insert and update data back into SQL Server. And once we're done with that, in the upcoming videos, we'll then focus on formatting and just making it more and more elegant and user-friendly and more robust as well. And also, show you more best practice methods in programming techniques so that you can reuse some of the code. So I realized that for some of you, the video may have been a little slow because you're already an advanced Excel user with, fluency in SQL Server, SQL, and maybe programming like VBA. And maybe you were just curious to see how I did it. Maybe you even have a better way of doing it. If you do, I'd really like to know about that, because I do have an open mind. I like to improve myself, just like you guys are by watching this video. You're here to learn. I'm a student as well, an ongoing student. I like to learn new things and better ways of doing things. So if you know of something that I can do better in one of the videos that I do, one of the techniques that I'm teaching, I'd like to hear about it and from you. And if you convince me, I'll incorporate that into an upcoming video. So we're here as a team to make things better for everybody. So if you like this video and found it useful, I would really appreciate it if you can give me a thumbs up on this video. And if you didn't subscribe yet, do subscribe. I do recommend that. And click on that little bell icon so that you get notified when I publish a new video. That way you will not miss out when part 2 comes out and so on. And if you haven't done so yet, you can also hop over to my blog website, KuduTek.com. I'll include a link to the site in the description of this video below. So definitely go check that out. And you can also, subscribe there to my mailing list, and that way you will get, notified when I do publish a new video or when I write a new article that I put out on the website. So thank you very much for your support and your interest in what we're doing here, and I'm looking forward to doing the next video with you. And again, let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to try to help you as much as I can. Thank you.